I'm Dr. Lynn Schuchter. I had the honor of serving as ASCO's president for the past year, and I just want to begin by thanking the UICC on a fabulous World Cancer Congress meeting. This is the first time I've attended this meeting, and I have to say that I am leaving Geneva feeling very inspired by everyone's commitment to tackling the problem of cancer, providing better care for our patients with cancer. And the spirit of collaboration is so palpable at this meeting. I just want to congratulate all of you on the incredible work that you're doing. So what we are doing today with this really esteemed panel is to share some of what was presented at this past annual ASCO meeting in Chicago. So we'll each present really briefly, about 10 minutes, a couple of papers that we think would be especially of interest to this group, and a little bit share my goals for my presidential year of ASCO. And I just start by showing you my presidential theme, which was the art and science of cancer care from comfort to cure. And with this theme, I was really trying to emphasize, yes, we are making extraordinary progress in curing many patients with cancer, and the science is really driving these remarkable cures, cancers that we thought were really refractory. But this theme also recognizes that many patients are not benefiting from all of these therapies, either because therapies don't work, cancer cells become resistant, or unfortunately, too many patients lack access to vital cancer treatment. And so emphasizing really the importance of palliative care and comfort care as we think about the care of patients with cancer. And I want to begin with, these are patients from my clinic. I'm at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm a medical oncologist focusing on melanoma. And these are patients with stage 4 melanoma, a type of skin cancer that's traveled throughout the body. They have received different types of new therapy, either immunotherapy or targeted therapy, and they are cancer-free, and they are off therapy. And this is no longer rare, that every clinic session, actually, I'm able to take a picture of a patient who's had this extraordinary success. But this is also my patient, Tara Miller. She was 28 when she died from metastatic melanoma. And again, this emphasizes the need that no matter the stage of the illness, we must incorporate palliative care. And what we've really learned over a decade or more of research is that integration of palliative care early is key to improving the lives of patients, to alleviate suffering, and to make sure we're giving care that is most important to that patient and to that family. So what I've been advocating over this past year is a fundamental concept in medicine that dates back to Hippocrates: to cure sometimes, to relieve often, to comfort always is all that may reasonably be expected of medicine. That phrase, to comfort always, is essential to the care that we provide. And I've heard so much of that discussion and the importance of palliative care during the past few days at the Congress. So with these extremes of cure and palliative care, I want to share with you just two abstracts that were presented at ASCO. And these were presented in the plenary session. So these are the top 4 to 5 abstracts that were presented out of 5,000 to a very large audience. And one of these studies was NADINA. This is the neoadjuvant study of immunotherapy, nivolumab and ipilimumab, versus adjuvant nivolumab in macroscopic, meaning palpable, stage 3 melanoma. And so what we've learned over several years is that this concept of neoadjuvant therapy, preoperative therapy, especially immunotherapy, probably is the way to go with melanoma. There's something about having the tumor present when you are delivering the immunotherapy that you get a more expanded repertoire of immune cells. So this study evaluated a more intensive regimen of 2 immunotherapy medications, ipilimumab and nivolumab, I'll say ipi plus nivo, preoperatively versus postoperatively with adjuvant nivolumab. But I want to point out a key thing at the top here, which is that in patients who had a complete pathological response, meaning all the tumor went away when the surgery was performed, so patients had pre-op treatment, that lymph node was removed, pathologically assessed, and then depending upon that pathological response, dictated what the next therapy will be. And in patients who had a complete pathologic response, you could stop therapy. So yes, this is intense at the beginning with dual checkpoint inhibitor therapy, but for those with a very good response, perhaps you could give a shortened course of therapy, so less therapy. And I'm, again, just briefly showing you results. The primary endpoint is something called event-free survival, so how long a patient goes before having a recurrence. And you see that in the blue curve, high event-free survival in patients who received preoperative neoadjuvant immunotherapy with IPI plus nivo versus postoperative nivolumab. And just at ESMO, and I don't have the slide, but at ESMO, they presented an update showing the distant-free survival, distant-free metastasis survival as well. This paper was published in the New England Journal of Medicine at the time of the ASCO presentation. And so NADINA is the first neoadjuvant checkpoint inhibitor phase 3 trial that's been conducted. And importantly, which is what I want to emphasize here, there was a high complete pathologic response that happened in more than half the patients, and those patients only received 2 cycles of therapy. So 6 weeks of therapy, and now they're monitored and off therapy. There's a different strategy if patients didn't have a complete pathological response, but I won't go into those details. But this is something to consider as we try to give less therapy based upon important evidence of response to treatment. So this is the way the melanoma field is moving into a neoadjuvant setting. And then to the other extreme of thinking about palliative care, this was also presented in our plenary session. We know that early intervention of specialist palliative care for patients with lung cancer has an important impact on quality of life and even in some studies, overall survival. And this study began in patients with advanced lung cancer. This is actually prior to the COVID pandemic, and really tried to study then in-person delivery of specialized palliative care to patients with advanced lung cancer over many visits versus telemedicine approach with palliative care. There was concern that maybe a telemedicine approach to a palliative care visit wouldn't have the same impact of doing that visit in person. So an important study and important implications if successful. I want to say this is one of the largest studies done. They enrolled over 1,200 patients to these 2 arms of telemedicine palliative care versus in-person palliative care. And the study evaluated both impacts on caregivers and impacts on the patients. It was not a complicated study, but I'm just showing you more details of the actual randomization and how many patients it takes to really approach to try to do these kinds of trials, more than 2,000 with over 1,200 patients accepting participation. And this was the key primary endpoint, which was quality of life, and it showed that delivering palliative care via telemedicine achieved the same good results as doing in person. And this has important implications because it could be much easier and more expanded access to palliative care if you could do it over telemedicine or with mobile devices. So it really did show that you can successfully deliver this type of palliative care. And this was the main finding of the REACH study. And then just to say that utilization of telemedicine to deliver this kind of care really has broader implications on education, training, and delivery of many different types of care. So this just shows a new way of giving it, and we don't compromise our ability to deliver effective palliative care. So just in closing then, emphasizing that patients on the road to cure need symptom palliation as much as those with more advanced cancer, and there are many unique ways to deliver this care. Thank you so much. And now I want to invite my colleague from ASCO, Dr. Julie Gralo, who's our Chief Medical Officer, to share a few more ASCO abstracts. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn, for showing us how maybe if we're trying to figure out how to give immunotherapy, afford immunotherapy in melanoma, if we do it right, we might only have to give 2 doses versus a whole year, and a lot of countries can probably afford that. And then how do you deliver palliative care when you don't have palliative care specialists? This is applicable to the US and rural situations as well. So I'm Julie Gralo. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at the American Society of Clinical Oncology, ASCO. I'm just going to quickly go over a little bit on artificial intelligence and its impact on global cancer care as presented at our annual meeting. Now, ASCO has just put online a policy statement of ASCO principles for responsible use of artificial intelligence in oncology. And from that principles statement, we say the speed with which AI is being developed and integrated, particularly in clinical oncology and scientific research, is truly remarkable. You all know that. AI is predicted to have a profound impact on healthcare and research. There's a growing sense of urgency among clinicians, patients, policymakers, ASCO, to understand both its potential and its risks. And this is the big deal, is also the risks. So we're entering a new era in cancer care and research, fueled and supported by AI, machine learning, technology. ASCO understands the potential for this new technology to provide global benefits, but we're also aware of the need for thoughtful deployment and monitoring. So in Dr. Schuchter's President's opening session, one of her invited speakers was Dr. Jonathan Carlson from Microsoft, and he spoke on the emergence of general AI for biomedicine. This is one of his slides. We tried to get it around the paywall, but Microsoft didn't allow it, so I'm sorry that I can't allow all of you to see it. But at our breakthrough meeting in Yokohama, Japan, just earlier this month, I think, we also had a keynote speaker, Dr. Andrew Trister, speaking about plating the golden braid, how artificial intelligence informs the learning health system. He covered modern AI systems, their applications in healthcare, the impact that patient data must have to ensure equity and reliability of applications to improve patient care. And we were able to get this one around the paywall, so anybody can access this one online. I'm going to review what I thought was one of my favorite abstracts from the ASCO annual meeting on AI. We put it in the press program. And so this is a study that's looking at using an AI patient navigator of sorts, a bot, to help engage patients in the Bronx, in New York, who either missed a colonoscopy appointment or were referred but never scheduled one. And so the setting is the Bronx in New York, and the Bronx is a little bit more like rest of world in that the race and ethnicity, 57% Hispanic, 44% Black, 34% are foreign-born. This shows some of the common ancestries. Non-English as a primary language, 56%. So this is more applicable to a population that has a lot of needs and is underserved. So despite active outreach by professional patient navigators, about 60% of patients either canceled or didn't show for their colonoscopy in 2022. And so they looked at using an AI-based virtual patient navigator, her name was My Eleanor, to improve rates of colorectal screening. And My Eleanor can make thousands of personalized telephone calls daily, so she was designed to complement the professional patient navigators in an overstretched healthcare workforce. We've talked a lot about navigation at this meeting and how are we going to afford it and do it and have the personnel. So my Eleanor was able to detect subtle changes in the patient's voice, listening not only to what the patients were saying, but also how they said it, which is fascinating. And my Eleanor could detect targeted needs, triage patients, send information to care team members so that the care team members, the humans, could spend more time educating, engaging, navigating, and treating patients. And this just shows that they targeted about 2,400 patients, she speaks Spanish, I think I said that, and this is just an example of scripting, which you can't really read, but I've listened to transcripts, looked at transcripts. It's very cool. You know, what shocked me kind of was that 57% of patients picked up the phone and answered, because I never answer my phone anymore without screening it. But 57% engaged with the call, went back and forth with my Eleanor. She would say, I understand that you've been recommended to have a colonoscopy. What are the barriers? How can I help you? And of those, 58% actually accepted a live handoff right away to a human navigator who scheduled them. And they doubled. They were able to transfer patients. The no-show completion rate doubled. Patient volume increased by 36%, and completed colonoscopies before they started were about 3,800, and in 2023 they went up to 5,200. They estimated that they were freeing up over 50 hours per month for the patient navigators to spend more time with the patients, schedule them, and field the transfer calls and talk to patients. And then with respect to the barriers to screening, my Eleanor asked them about what are the problems, what questions do you have? She was able to provide information. And the barriers were, in order, transportation issues, the perceived need. Why do I need a colonoscopy? The time it would take away from work, et cetera. Confusion about why the MD was actually referring them. Medical mistrust was another big one. The fear about findings. What happens if I have a positive result? The cost. And then it was 2022, so there were still some residual COVID concerns. So their conclusions were that AI-driven virtual navigation was helpful. There was high patient acceptance. It helped extend the navigation beyond the need for humans. Although humans were involved, we didn't replace them. And they're going to measure many more of the effects. She speaks English and Spanish. She could speak any language. This was focused on colonoscopy. They're going to move into screening, mammography, cervical cancer screening. And then the integration into the hospital-based EMR, system tracking, et cetera, that's kind of one of the challenges they're working on. So in conclusion, out of our ASCO principles for responsible use of AI in oncology, we have 6 major tenets. We need transparency, we need informed stakeholders, we need equity and fairness, we need accountability, we need oversight and privacy, and we still need it to be human-centered. And out of our principles, we say by collectively embracing these principles, ASCO hopes to enable AI as a driver of innovation and clinician empowerment, enhancing the practice of medicine. Thank you. And I would like to now bring up to the podium my colleague, Dr. Christopher Booth.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks to the organizers for allowing us to speak. And I just really want to show gratitude to ASCO leadership. Dr. Schuchter and Dr. Graylo have been incredibly supportive of the themes and the concepts that I'll speak about over the next few minutes. So I'm very grateful for that. My name is Chris Booth. I'm a medical oncologist from Canada. I'm based at Queen's University in Kingston. By way of disclosures, I have no relationships with the pharmaceutical industry. But the disclosure I do want to start with is in the next few minutes, I'm going to be somewhat critical of some of the challenges in our field, but just want to start by grounding this in the fact that this comes from a place of deep caring and recognizing that there's things that we do very well in the delivery of clinical care, but there's areas perhaps we can do better. And this is about having a conversation that's moving beyond just identifying problems with being solution-focused. So I'm going to start with something I call the cancer medicine paradox, which I think will be very familiar to this audience, which is that on one hand, we have very, very high utilization rates of therapies, usually in the last 6 or 12 months of life, that have very, very small benefits, but significant clinical, financial, and time toxicities. Yet at the same time, those treatments we have, which make a major difference in the outcomes of our patients, remain unavailable to most people who could benefit from them globally. And so just very briefly, Cancer Medicine Economics 101. Over the last 10 years or so, we've learned a few key lessons, and this is, I think, a summary slide. Drug expenditures are skyrocketing, and this is not sustainable in any health system. The price of cancer medicines is actually not related to how well they work. And biopharma has largely pivoted into the cancer space, and while there's obviously some potential upsides for the delivery of clinical care and oncology, there's some warning signs for health systems more broadly in this context. One of the examples of this came from work that we do with the WHO Essential Medicine List Cancer Working Group. We ran a project called the Desert Island Study a few years ago, where we asked frontline oncologists, about 1,000 oncologists in more than 80 countries globally, which cancer medicines do you think are the most important that you would really want to deliver care to the people in your practice? And the oncologists are quite pragmatic. If you limit the number of medicines that they could have in a hypothetical thought experiment, the medicines they really wish to have are generally older cytotoxic and hormone therapies that we've had for decades, and those medicines are chosen because they have very large benefits. On this list, there were some of our newer medicines and some new expensive medicines too, but it was those medicines which have very large benefits. The tragedy, however, was when we asked the same doctors, to what extent are you able to deliver these really important medicines in your practice, despite the fact that these drugs generally are generic and 20 or 30 years old, most oncologists were unable to give them because of extreme financial toxicity. This is a summary slide from a body of work we've called The Evolution of the RCT in Oncology. We've published a few iterations of this. This is the most recent one. And I think in this one picture, it illustrates some of the major temporal trends and challenges in our field. And you can see clinical trials in the 80s and 90s were generally designed with overall survival as the primary endpoint. These novel therapeutics were being tested to see if they could help people live longer. But that's decreased, and in the modern era, only about 25 or 30% of new RCTs are being launched to improve overall survival. The new king of oncology is progression-free survival, which of course was invented to guide decision-making in phase 1 and phase 2 trials. And while progression-free survival does have a role in some contexts in phase 3 RCTs, in the vast majority of circumstances, it is not a good surrogate for things that really matter to patients like overall survival and quality of life. The other finding, of course, is that more than 90% of RCTs in our field are now funded by the pharmaceutical industry. And it's, again, worth recognizing that some of our best treatments and most highly conducted trials are done in partnership with our colleagues in the pharmaceutical industry, but clearly the pendulum has swung very far to one side when the funding almost exclusively comes from one source. This is an important number, 3 months. We've just discussed the fact that most new medicines that are approved for cancer, there's no evidence they help people live longer. But amongst those that do, in aggregate, this is the median improvement in overall survival. Clearly, we've had some home run medicines that extend life by many, many months or even many years. But in aggregate, the median gain in survival is about 3 months. And as someone who looks after patients with advanced GI cancer, I certainly would not want to belittle or take away the value of an extra few months of life. But I think we need to remember these comes with important caveats. Our patients are the ones who need to live with the clinical toxicity and side effects, which we know are always greater in routine practice than clinical trials. The financial toxicity can be extreme for patients, families, and the health system of these new medicines. And the emerging concepts of time toxicity and the gap between outcomes in trials and outcomes in routine practice are also important caveats we need to remember. This is a global overview, another piece of work we published recently, looking at the broad landscape of RCTs in our field, not just in cancer medicines, but broadly across surgery, radiotherapy, and medical oncology. Over a period of 4 years, there were 700 RCTs published, and when we looked at where they were being conducted and led, more than 90% of them were being led by investigators in high-income countries. There's clearly a large mismatch between the burden of global cancer and where the research is originating. And some of the key findings are that the cancers classically associated with low socioeconomic status and poverty, cancers of the cervix, stomach, esophagus, and liver, are underrepresented in the global portfolio of clinical trials. And again, remembering that most patients in the world who are cured of cancer are cured by surgery and radiotherapy, yet only 13% of global RCTs are testing new strategies in those two modalities. Finally, another important signal that came out was we saw that amongst those trials that are led by our colleagues in LMICs, there's a lot that we can learn. Our colleagues in LMICs do not have the luxury of running mega trials powered to detect very small benefits. They design trials that are more pragmatic, targeting larger effect sizes. It also turns out they're more likely to be positive and identify larger benefits. This is all important information for us to learn from as we design trials in HICs, yet when we looked at where the trials were published, there was a huge gap in the impact factor between clinical trials that come from LMICs compared to HICs, and this publication prejudice needs to be recognized and mitigated. So this constellation of challenges led a number of us to get together about a year and a half ago and say, let's start talking about how we can move towards solutions to some of these really, really complex problems in our field. And this was the beginning of the Common Sense Oncology Initiative. Why did we launch CSO? I think it came from a place of deep caring, a strong belief that patients deserve better. I think broadly, the themes that we talk about are not new. All of us that work in the cancer space have struggled with these issues for many years, but we thought it was time to create a space where we could talk openly about these challenges. We remain unwilling to be silent on the problems in our field, and we want to move beyond just criticizing or identifying problems and becoming solution-focused. We want to set an example for the next generation of leaders in our field, and again, create a place where we can have these honest but difficult conversations, reflect on where we're going, show self-humility, and ultimately change things to make it better for our patients. So we gathered, the initial planning meeting had included 30 people from 15 different countries, including a number of patients and patient advocates. And for 3 vigorous days of debate, we talked about where we wanted to go as a field, what challenges we thought were important, and where we believed we could have an impact. And this led to our publication last summer in Lancet Oncology, where we outlined the mission of this initiative is to ensure that cancer systems and research focus on the outcomes that matter to patients, and that regardless of where someone lives, they have access to those cancer treatments which make a real difference in their lives. We have a series of guiding principles, including access to quality cancer care as a basic human right. Patient and societal needs should be driving the research and policy agenda. Patient and public involvement is crucial in both how we design studies and how we make policy at tables. We think it's important that if a patient walks into a cancer hospital, they should be able to expect the treatments offered to them will help them live longer and or better lives. And so overall survival and quality of life remain really important in all that we do. Of course, all of these therapeutic decisions rely on truly informed, shared decision-making, recognizing that every patient will be unique and have a different view on how they want to spend their time, what treatments they want to pursue, and how this meets with their own values and preferences. Cancer treatment should be fairly priced for the benefits they offer. And finally, equity and access to high-quality care is just as important as new innovation and big tech. We've organized our work stream around 3 core pillars. We're seeking to improve how we generate evidence, how we interpret evidence, and how we communicate evidence. The first bucket is largely being led by clinical trialists. We're working with cooperative trial groups and others around the world to improve how we design, conduct, and report RCTs. Evidence interpretation is an educational work stream, working with training programs to ensure the next generation of clinicians are well trained in the skills of critical appraisal, critical thinking, and epidemiology. And evidence communication is engaged with our patient and patient advocate partners to ensure we learn how we can talk about these difficult issues, both at the bedside, but more broadly with policymakers and in the public. And so we have 5 project teams, and I should mention that from day one, patients and patient advocates have been part of this collective and are populated on each of these teams, and in fact have shared leadership roles on some of them. We have a project team tackling RCT design, an educational work stream, stakeholder engagement. Our patient priorities task force is looking at these issues of communication, and we're also working in health system policy. In closing, I'll just read the last paragraph from our essay in Lancet Oncology, just to leave you with a sense of the ethos of this initiative. Common Sense Oncology will promote interventions that measurably improve the lives of patients. We will celebrate well-conducted trials and promote effective treatments, but we will also be willing to speak up and challenge interventions that might cause more harm than good. We seek to decrease global inequities and access to affordable, high-quality care. Improvements in the generation, interpretation, and communication of evidence will help move our field closer to a future in which a patient's outcome is not determined by where they live, what they can afford, or the strength of a marketing campaign. And with that, I'll close, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. And just to draw attention that our second batch of CSO fellows, applications are open to the end of next week. So for the next generation of leaders who are interested in working on health policy, education, and clinical research, please read more about it. Thank you very much.
Morning, everyone. Thank you for your attendance. I'm an oncologist based in London, a professor at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. What I'm going to be discussing is that old nutshell, quality. It's important, we know it's important, but actually how much attention at most conferences we go to is they're based on it. And it was fantastic this summer at ASCO that there was a whole session devoted to that. The slides I'm going to show partly are from Julie Graylow, Jackson Oram from the Uganda Cancer Institute, and work that I was leading as well in London as part of a global collaboration. There is a crisis in cancer care delivery. Let's be very honest about it. These are issues germane to every country. Accessibility, affordability. Should we be more evidence-based? Should we be more patient-centered? That relates to the service, cancer service. It's not about innovation. It's about actually can we deliver care better and of higher quality. And ASCO has been involved in this space for many years. It started with the ASCO guidelines back in 1994, the Quality Oncology Practice Initiative in 2002, and it's moved on to training programs and much more around implementation and a wider international space in that towards value-based care. And I'm going to give some examples of that. And one of the key examples is the Quality Oncology Practice Initiative. And that's really around trying to coalesce on a core group of quality metrics, particularly with regards to outpatient care in medical oncology. It started off in oncology practices in the United States, an outpatient setting. It moved internationally in 2015. And the examples I'm going to give is the low middle income country translation that had been ongoing with the Uganda Cancer Institute, one of those. And it really was about aligning the needs in each specific context. So if we start in terms of where they were in 2020, the ASCO team worked very closely with the Uganda Cancer Institute, and this was led by Dr. Jackson Oram, who many of you may know. And this was a fantastic presentation at ASCO itself. Essentially, you take a set of metrics, and you have to ask yourself the question, does this matter in my context? Are we asking the right questions? But more than that, can we actually measure this? Can we action this? And can we improve it? Measurable, actionable, improvable. Those are three core tenets, and we have to look at that with every key indicator. And the key bit was actually, let's keep it pragmatic. Let's look at 5 key metrics. Let's have a look at them. Pathology reporting confirming malignancy. Yes, that makes sense. Staging documented within 1 month of first office visit. Documented plan for chemotherapy, so the dose, the route, and the time intervals. And just to be clear, when you look into the literature, the #1 area of quality improvement in medical oncology is safe prescribing practice. It's the #1 because errors can be fatal in that regard. You look at the number of cycles completed, and then finally, has pain been assessed by the second office visit? And there you see a very contextualized question for the Uganda population there. So what they did is they created this metric, and they did 6 cycles of continuous improvement or performance improvement, trying to look at these indicators, and it coalesced around a score. It started at 45% when they started in baseline in 2020, and gradually moved up. And you can see that the gains become ever more marginal, and there's a sort of plateau as such. That's quite normal, and actually the next step towards can you go further is benchmarking with other centers, because actually within the context of your own hospital, you can only do so much, but actually in terms of learning and translating new practices, benchmarking is very much a part of that. But what was key, and what I loved about Jackson's actual talk, is that he reflected on what were the barriers to actually doing this, because actually people tell you to collect something, but how do you operationalize it, and how do you actually change practice? So the first thing was actually, did he have all the clinicians and staff on side? There was initial hesitation. How am I going to collect this data? I don't have the time. This is just going to disrupt the workflow. Why are we doing this? So there has to be an intrinsic buy-in that quality is an innate good for patients. And we talked about that, not just patient-centered care, but what is the value of the treatments that we give her and reflect on that. Also, there were targeted training sessions. This will be reflective of any center trying to introduce quality initiatives. Second of all, who's going to collect it? Oh, yeah, well, we have a data collector. They deal with the notes. No, they'll say, I'm working every hour that God sends to do the work I'm doing already. Someone else needs to do it. That key responsibility, I can tell you, and from different audit programs I've been involved with, that's where it mostly fails. Who's going to collect it? Because we think, oh, well, someone will do it. But no, you have to put money aside. You have to see where that money can come from, and that's what they did, looking at internal processes, and also trying to make it cost-effective as possible. And I suggest to anyone bringing in a quality management program, using an ingredients approach for costing, that can actually look to see, well, what is it costing to deliver this, and the frequency of reporting. And then third of all, well, we talked about duration and number of cycles. We've talked about pain assessment. We've seen from our colleagues, everyone has a different writing style in the notes, to a signature, to a few lines that you can't see, to 3 or 4 pages, and you think, where do they have the time for that? And so one of the things that they found was the standardization of the documentation, the nomenclature. You can use checklists, you can use a variety of things, but this is going to be another key ingredient. Is every set of notes going to record it in the same way, in the same time, in a prospective manner for you to collect it? So I think these are 3 really critical learning points that can be taken. I move on to a piece of work that I led as part of a global initiative, working with the City Cancer Challenge. We have a number of collaborators. Carla Ungar Soldana from Mexico was presenting about this in one of the earlier sessions. And what we really wanted to do was, actually, everyone keeps talking about quality indicators, and you'll see different groups publishing their 45 quality indicators that everyone should do for some niche part of a particular cancer. That's not helpful for starting a quality management program. A, the burden of collection. B, it's overwhelming. And C, how do you start to do quality improvement on 45 different indicators? So we decided to take an ambitious proposal where we actually wanted to see, can we have a core set of indicators that every practice setting in the world could collect for data collection? But we wanted to be robust. We didn't want to just come round a table and say, we think these are a great idea. We really know what we're talking about, and this is what you need to collect. So we did what we thought was important, what's in the literature. We did 2 systematic reviews, and there was already one in radiation oncology, so we did this specifically for medical and surgical oncology. There are so many indicators, so before going and sitting around a table trying to find other indicators, please look at these systematic reviews. We found 216, and the thing about these indicators, we were specifically looking for those that have been used in quality management programs. These weren't a sort of best set case study. We then had 3 expert panel workshops because we really wanted to get the 216 down to a sort of short list. And a big factor was, could you collect this in your setting? Is this useful in your setting? Is the level of development such that this is an indicator that matters? And we came to 34. We went from that to the Delphi consensus process, and we engaged with National Cancer Grid of India, ASCO, the City Cancer Challenge, and Aortic, and we had 145 participants from 59 countries in round 1. Those indicators that didn't make it to the next round were not used, and then the ones that were in between went to the second round, which had another 30 participants. So what did we find? So the first thing you'll notice is that we've got Tier 1 and Tier 2. What does that mean? Tier 1 was the expectation that every cancer center, wherever it is in the world, should be able to collect these because they're important to patients and it should be available. Second, Tier 2, we had a Tier 3, but nothing got shortlisted for Tier 3, but Tier 2 is that next step up in terms of development, so the appropriateness of the care you're giving. Are you giving a mastectomy when a wide local excision may be possible? Are you giving combined multimodality treatment where that's indicated? So let's look at some of the indicators. They're actually very similar in terms of themes. Have you had a biopsy before initiating therapy? Have you got complete staging? What is the time frame for completion of radiotherapy, systemic therapy treatment? What are the proportion and what's the time frame for doing it? Because we know that these are proxies for outcomes eventually. In terms of tumor types, we also asked people, would you want to use these across all the different tumor types, or are there some to prioritize? And the common ones came up: breast, cervix, colorectal, and prostate. So what are the next steps? There's the dissemination, again working with the City Cancer Challenge, but other groups. Actually, these aren't to say you need to use these indicators. Everything needs to be co-designed internally. But where I really, really want to push the next thing is, how do you operationalize? Who's going to measure it? Who's going to report it? How are you going to feedback? Who's going to take responsibility for actually closing that quality deficit? Because that's the question where everyone's looking at each other on the table going, oh yeah, we have a problem, how do we deal with it? And we really need to use an improvement science research framework. And there's more work coming in this space, and would hope to share with you in the coming years. So thank you very much for your attention, and I had a very fantastic group of people involved, and the QR code was for the overview of the session that we did at ASCO, which people can use. Thanks for your attention.
Great, thanks for that, Ajay. And both the education sessions that Chris and Ajay reviewed for you are around the paywall at ASCO, so you can go look up ASCO meeting 2024, and we've got both of those education sessions, Common Sense Oncology and the Quality Around the Globe, available around the paywall. So I am going to close out this session by spending a few minutes talking about gains in precision medicine with the focus on lung cancer. Now, I realize that we said the session was about how do we apply the annual meeting findings to low and middle income countries. I think we would all agree that while many of the drugs I am going to mention or the trials are not yet practical, feasible, ready, we don't have the diagnostics, we can't afford the drugs in all low and middle income settings, but this is where medicine is going, precision medicine. All lung cancer is not the same, and we have to be sorting it out by having the diagnostics and then being able to apply specific drugs for that subset of lung cancer. So approvals for precision oncology and immuno-oncology drugs have really been transformational in non-small cell lung cancer. Here are two articles, in the lay press, the Wall Street Journal, Apple News. Lung cancer was a death sentence. Now drugs are saving lives, and then Apple News says the lung cancer drugs saving lives. These were from our annual meeting. And identifying targetable mutations in non-small cell lung cancer has led to the approval of numerous drugs targeting EGFR, ALK, MET, RET, KRAS, et cetera. In the US, these are FDA-approved precision oncology drugs between 1998 and 2022. 198 new drugs FDA-approved in that period, 83% classified as molecularly targeted, 43% precision oncology, which means you need the biomarker in order to know if you should use the drug. And what I put the red boxes on here are ones that are relevant to lung cancer, some of which I will talk about now with a few new abstracts. So associated with this precision oncology, targeted therapy, immunotherapy, these FDA approvals, we have in the US seen corresponding declines in mortality and improvements in 5-year survival in non-small cell lung cancer. And so you can see, you can see my arrow. You can see that the incidence and the, up in the green and the mortality, they start to diverge a bit, starting in the era of immunotherapy and targeted therapy. And here's what's happened to 5-year survival after a diagnosis of non-small cell lung cancer. Erlotinib, EGFR targeted therapy, was approved in here. And now we start with all these other drugs approved. 5-year overall survival has gone from about, I think this is 15% here, back in about 2004, up to 26.7% as last comfortably measured, and that we have comfort in saying this is actually where we've gone. So 5-year survival, overall survival improving. This is one of the presentations at the ASCO annual meeting in an education session, just talking about all the metastatic non-small cell lung cancer actionable mutations. And here you can't read what all of the different ones are, but as many as 50% of patients with advanced non-small lung cancer may have an actionable oncogenic mutation, meaning there is an abnormality that we can find with next-gen sequencing or in other ways, and a drug that is available to treat it. So KRAS, EGFR are two of the biggest. Here's one abstract that was in our ASCO plenary looking at EGFR as a target. This is abstract LBA4. This is looking at unresectable stage 3 non-small cell lung cancer patients who have EGFR mutations. This is probably a third of unresectable stage 3 non-small cell. Osimertinib is a newer 3rd generation EGFR inhibitor. It's oral. Prior studies have shown that osimertinib, this 3rd generation EGFR therapy, is superior to 1st generation EGFR therapies. The standard of care in unresectable stage 3 non-small cell lung cancer is chemoradiation, followed by consolidation, with an immune checkpoint inhibitor, durvalumab, but a subset analysis of the big study that led to the approval and the use of durvalumab consolidation, the subset of EGFR shows over here that there's really no difference in those who have EGFR mutations. So we do big trials. We include all non-discriminant non-small cell lung cancer. We get approvals that are irrelevant for subsets, the EGFR subset. Durvalumab really, in this subset analysis, is doing nothing better than placebo. So this study was designed to see if now, after chemoradiation, we could use an EGFR targeted therapy. So 216 patients, they all got chemoradiation, no progression, randomized to osimertinib, 80 milligrams a day versus placebo as consolidation, since we had shown durvalumab doesn't really work. And importantly, at the time of disease progression, those in the placebo arm were offered the osimertinib. And what we see, I mean, you don't need a magnifying glass to see the difference here in progression-free survival. Like, this is the kind of stuff that we're seeing, whopping differences in non-small cell lung cancer when you hit the right target. So median progression-free survival was 39 months versus 5.6 months. You know, 3-year overall survival, 84 versus 74%, and that is undoubtedly, if we had not allowed crossover, would have been much greater. But it's important that we allowed crossover, so that we took this important drug and allowed it to the people who had gotten placebo. And, you know, toxicities are increased by these drugs, and just like you, I don't like when we say, and the drug was well tolerated, because they're not. They add toxicities, but we've got to just acknowledge and understand and weigh the risks versus the benefits. The interim analysis of overall survival here is not statistically significant, but there's a trend. But I am saying that with the, although I agree with Common Sense Oncology that the gold standard is overall survival, when you allow crossover, you are going to interfere with the ability to show overall survival. So from this study, you know, in this setting, stage 3 unresectable non-small cell lung cancer, osimertinib consolidation is effective. Can overall survival benefit be reached ever with an 80% crossover? I ask you, I think probably not. What's the optimal timing, though, of adding osimertinib? Because if we can't prove a difference in osimertinib being given first line versus second line at the time of crossover, maybe we don't need it first line. So we do need to do studies sorting out, do you need to give it up front, or can you give it at progression? Is 80 milligrams a day of osimertinib the right dose? There have been studies looking at lesser doses. And what's the impact, if we can't afford osimertinib now, what's the impact of these other first or second generation EGFR targeted therapies that are much more affordable, some of which have gone off patent? We should study that. A second plenary abstract now is on small cell lung cancer, limited stage small cell. And for the most part, even in limited stage, small cell lung cancer is not curable. Median overall survival, 25 to 30 months, 5-year survival, about 30%. And this durvalumab, as we talked about previously, is an anti-PD-1 immune checkpoint inhibitor. So this is a phase 3 trial looking at durvalumab versus placebo as consolidation in limited stage small cell lung cancer. So they all got, again, chemoradiation without evidence of progression, which is relevant to about 3/4 of limited stage small cell. They go through chemoradiation, they don't have progression. And here in this study, we actually, at the time of presentation, see an overall survival benefit, 55.9 versus 33 months, and a median progression-free survival difference, 16 versus 9 months. The toxicities, interestingly, because this in orange is the placebo arm, they're mostly due to the chemorads and recovering from that, but there are some that are exacerbated a bit by the durvalumab. So conclusions from this is, in limited stage small cell lung cancer, consolidation with durvalumab improves PFS and OS after chemorads. This is the first change, advance in the treatment of limited stage small cell lung cancer in 20 years. So my question for you for all of us as to how do we incorporate these findings in high-income and low-income, middle-income countries is what's the optimal dose and the interval for durvalumab? And is this applicable to other PD-1, PD-L1 inhibitors? Could we use others, some of which will go off patent within the next year or two? And so do we need a year? Could we get away with it in shorter? Could we actually give it up front, like Lynn showed you with the melanoma trial, give just a couple doses up front and get maximum benefit, and then not need it for a year afterwards? A third abstract that we put in our press program is looking at ALK as a target in non-small cell lung cancer. This was the CROWN study. Now, only about 5% of non-small cell has an ALK fusion, so it's a less common, it's not relevant, but it is a subset that we have targeted treatments to. Crizotinib is a second-generation oral ALK-targeted therapy, tyrosine kinase inhibitor. Leratinib is a newer third generation that actually has good brain penetrance and broader coverage of ALK-resistant mutations. And about a quarter of non-small cell that has an ALK rearrangement develops brain mets, so that's important. So the study was a randomized phase 3 study, stage 3B or stage 4 ALK-positive non-small cell lung cancer. They allowed asymptomatic, treated or untreated brain mets, and they had previously shown an interim analysis of progression-free survival. Here they're showing 5-year survival data. I will tell you, they still haven't done a formal overall survival analysis. And this is 5-year follow-up. These are the publications of the earlier presentation and then a simultaneous presentation at ASCO. Leratinib versus crizotinib, 5-year progression-free survival. Again, I mean, I only picked out studies that you didn't need a magnifying glass to see the differences here. So this is progression-free survival. The newer generation, leratinib, certainly 60% 5-year PFS versus 8%. Median progression-free survival not reached yet for leratinib versus 9 months. This is looking at the patients who came in with baseline brain mets and those who didn't come in with baseline brain mets, and there was really good brain coverage here. If they came in without a brain met but developed it on study, it was only 4% with leratinib versus 36% with crizotinib. And if they came in with a baseline brain met and then the tumor progressed during the study, it was only 14% with leratinib versus 68% for crizotinib. So toxicities, some were, interestingly, they go both ways here, right? Some were worse with leratinib, some worse with crizotinib. So in conclusion, this is the progression-free survival of 5+ years is the longest that's ever been reported for a targeted therapy in non-small cell lung cancer. Leratinib is highly effective in the brain, and other ALK-targeted therapies aren't. But how do others compare? So this is compared, first and a second and a third generation. Sorry, there are second generations. We await the overall survival analysis. We did see a trend in favor of it for leratinib in the 2022 interim analysis. So meeting the CSO principles, that would be the gold standard. But with these marked differences here, especially with brain mets being a big issue in this population, if you can afford it, it seems that this is the superior drug. Here's an abstract, KRAS as a target. This is the Crystal 12 trial, and this is looking at a drug called adagrasib. And this is seen, a KRAS mutation is seen in about 30% of non-small cell. And this is another study, previously treated locally advanced or metastatic non-small cell. It's chemo versus adagrasib, and crossover again was allowed. With early 7-month median follow-up, it's very short follow-up, progression-free survival was 5.5 versus 3.8 months. Intracranial responses favored the KRAS target as opposed to docetaxel. I'm showing this in part because they used a very nice way of measuring toxicity, time to deterioration symptom scale. And actually, even though the adagrasib caused some symptoms, certainly chemotherapy does too. And this actually, the time to deterioration of symptoms favored adagrasib. And so brain activity seen here, nice use of a lung symptom scale to assess the impact on the patient. The crossover design may impact the ultimate ability to show overall survival, but we have other KRAS inhibitors. How does this drug compare? And then my last one, this is a cool one I'm putting in here because it's just showing that we can do trials based on quality of life and symptom reduction with an endpoint. So this is a monoclonal antibody, amivantamab, that targets EGFR and MET. It's FDA approved for use with chemo in advanced non-small cell lung cancer that has an EGFR exon 20 insertion mutation. And so basically, what I really want to show you is, it was a complicated study that had several arms, but what they're looking at here is using almost every monoclonal antibody can be given either IV or, if appropriately formulated, sub-Q. So they were looking at sub-Q versus IV use of this effective monoclonal antibody. And what they showed was pharmacokinetic endpoints. The sub-Q was non-inferior to IV. Clinical efficacy was similar in terms of response rate, duration of response, and adverse events were significantly lower, especially with respect to infusion reactions. You can see the IV over on the right versus sub-Q, where these serious infusion reactions were only 13% if given sub-Q versus 66% if given IV. So my point here being, we can find better ways of improving the toxicities of our therapy, and we should really be investigating sub-Q use for many or most of our monoclonal antibodies. So I'll end with this slide. We've got targeted therapies and immunotherapies on our WHO essential medicines list. Nivolumab with pembrolizumab for melanoma put on in 2023, erlotinib, and other EGFR targeted therapies in 2023. We have another planned update in 2025. We will get more immuno and targeted therapies on this list. So it's our duty to figure out how to give them, how to get the diagnostics needed, and how to get the drugs available in low and middle income countries. We've got lots of barriers. We know all about them. Barriers to the diagnostics, limited accessibility and affordability of the drugs, limited infrastructure and resources to support precision oncology, limited availability of trained healthcare providers and specialists to deliver them. But it is our duty to figure it out, because this is where we're going. And so I'll end by saying, if you are doing research in this area, submit to JCO Global Oncology, open access, and it's fully open access, online only. We've now got an impact factor. So we want to help do the studies, publish the studies, get the word out, so we can get precision oncology everywhere. Thank you very much.
Maybe, this mic on, maybe if you have questions, I will start questions, and just want to thank the panel. I didn't ask you this in advance, but we really tried with those plenary sessions to apply the principles of common sense oncology. I didn't mention the toxicity associated with Ipi-Nivo dual checkpoint inhibitor, which is double the toxicity of just nivolumab. Maybe shorter is going to be okay. But we showed, that Nadina study, people are saying we should change the standard of care now for patients with stage 3 palpable disease based upon early readout, event-free survival, double the toxicity. I mean, some of the other plenaries, we tried to apply your principles, and I did feel like we a little bit fell short. But can you comment, that study is probably going to change, it is changing the care of patients with melanoma already.
I think the studies that we saw presented today are examples of the power of clinical trials that are asking important questions, that are targeted for large benefits, and span the continuum from helping people live longer, but we also saw symptoms improvement, we see potential cost savings, we see interventions promoting palliative care. So I think all of the RCTs that were highlighted today really speak to the power of clinical trials to answer questions that matter.
Are there questions from the audience? AG, I'll just do one more. I think we have 18 seconds left. Okay. what are your top priorities as you're developing your next clinical trials in quality? How can we implement this work faster?
Very good question. I think co-design has to be at the heart of it. Every ecosystem, every hospital is different. The politics is different, the information systems are different, and the needs are different of those patients. So co-design has to be at the heart of it, and there has to be the governance that actually, when you start to measure quality, something can be done about it. But I came back to the original thing. You need data so you can measure, you can action, and you can improve. So good data, governance, and a commitment to co-design.
Perfect. And with that, we'll end this session. Thank you so much for joining us today.